How's it going, everybody? This is Nick. Welcome back to the Take Show. I know we've been gone for a while, but I appreciate y'all coming back to us. I'm excited to get this thing started again, and I figured what better time to bring it back during this pandemic. We all have a lot more time on our hands. We all have a lot of content being thrown at us, especially without live sports. So I figured we'll add to it, give y'all a little bit more to listen to, and maybe have a little bit of a different perspective than the same old stuff you're hearing all the time. So just like last time, we're going to look at sports. We're going to look at what's going on in the world, kind of everything that's happening, how I look at it, and we're going to go from there. I tend to think that I think a little bit differently than most people, so we'll see what happens. So where we are right now, we're about a week and a half away from the NFL draft. And everyone's just been talking about how weird this one's going to be since there is no, big show. They were going to do it in Vegas and make it this big thing, and then, the coronavirus happened, and now everybody's going to be doing it from their basement. But what I want to look at is, the first thing I want to look at is the quarterbacks this year, and then on top of that, I want to talk about some of the teams that hold what I'm calling swing picks in this draft. We always talk about, the Bengals have one, and then they have the number one overall pick, and then that the Dolphins have, 14, 15 picks? But I think there's more than that. There's swing teams that I think are at a point in the draft that can cause a pivot or a shift or a huge change if they make a move. I look at that as the Dolphins. I look at that as the Detroit Lions at 3 and the Chargers. So everybody has been saying since pretty much the LSU-Alabama game back in November that Joe Burrow was going to go number one. And he did just have probably the most impressive collegiate season that we've ever seen. 6,000 yards, 65 touchdowns, 15-0, won the national championship, won the Heisman. Anything you can do, he did. And so now he's kind of being looked at as this, shoe-in prospect, guaranteed to go number one. I don't know. And I'm not saying he's not good. All right, I want to get that out there first thing. I'm not saying Joe Burrow isn't good. There's no way you can do what he did at LSU and not be good. What I'm saying is he's more Tony Romo versus Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson. Meaning, he's not going to just go to any team and suddenly that team is the greatest team in the league. I've been obviously, like everybody else, I've been listening to a lot more of these sports talk shows, and with it being without live sports, it's been a lot harder to get content. So they've been doing a lot more of these, what I'll call like think pieces and opinion-based topics and things like that. And obviously the NFL draft, with it being so close, has been a primary topic of these things. And Colin Cowherd, I believe, was talking to several different, what they'll call experts. And he was saying that his comparison for Joe Burrow is Tony Romo. And I kind of like that. Tony Romo was exciting to watch. He was fun. He was really talented. Tony Romo, though, needed support around him. I think Joe Burrow is the same way. If you draft Joe Burrow and you give him a good set of talent, some receivers, a tight end, a good running back, a good offensive line, he's going to be good. Now, I understand that if you give that to any quarterback, they should be good. Should be. But I think Joe Burrow isn't exactly the 99 overall prospect that he's being made out to be. Now, to probably the hotter of the takes that I have for this class. Tua's overhyped. Look, I get it. He took Jalen Hurts' spot. He went 26-2 at Alabama, 33 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. I know all the numbers. All right. If you know me, you know I know all of the numbers. I just don't see it with Tua. He's not very tall, which I know is starting to matter less and less in today's NFL with Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray and Drew Brees. I understand that. But he's still 6 feet tall. He's not very fast. He doesn't have a very strong arm. I get it. He's accurate, and all these other different things. He has what they call good touch on the ball, which personally, that to me is something you say about a quarterback that doesn't have a good arm. All right. You're trying to find something good to say about the guy. And I'm not saying he's not going to be a successful quarterback, but I've heard people say that he's the number one best quarterback in this class, that he's one of the better ones they've ever scouted, that, if it wasn't for his hip injury, he would be in competition for the number one spot. I don't see it. I've always been of the belief that for quarterbacks, you draft physical traits. I know that's not, maybe standard practice, but, I can teach you how to go through your progressions on a defense. I can teach you how to come off of a first read and get to your second or your third. Getting beyond that, I can teach you how to do film study. What I can't teach you is how to throw the ball 80 yards. What I can't teach you is how to be 6'5" and run a 4.5. What I can't teach you is to be Lamar Jackson and be the best athlete on the field, no matter who you're playing. What I can't teach is Patrick Mahomes throwing it sidearm across his body 30 yards downfield, or throwing it with his left hand when he's about to get sacked by Von Miller. Those are the things you can't teach because that's just natural ability, which is why I personally like Jordan Love and Justin Herbert in this draft a little bit more than I like Joe Burrow and Tua. And to me, they're two different camps. You have the high floor camp with Joe Burrow and Tua, and you have the high ceiling camp with Jordan Love and Justin Herbert. You got the two guys over here, the high ceilings. They can be Andrew Luck. Jordan Love has been compared to Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. And they could be these incredibly high-level players if they rein in some of the stuff that can be coached. Whereas you have these high-floor players that maybe have less holes than these other guys, but they also don't have the natural physical ability. So you have to factor in certain other things in drafting them. Where you're going to play. Is it cold? Is it windy? Does it rain a lot? Are you going to play in domes more often than not? Weather matters to a guy that doesn't have a huge arm. You have to do his speed. If you don't have a great O-line and he can't get away from pressure, what do you do? So you have these guys that maybe have less holes in their game, but less physical ability. And for me, if I'm looking at two guys and they're close, like let's say I have Tua and Justin Herbert graded very, very closely on my board. If I think Tua is 3 and I think Justin Herbert is 4 or 5, but I'm a team like the Redskins or the Bengals at 1 or 2, or even I guess not the Lions, because the Lions do play in a dome, but they'll play in Green Bay and Chicago. But, let's take the Redskins, for example. They're going to play outside in Maryland weather 8 games out of the year. They're going to play in MetLife Stadium, which is a wind tunnel. They're going to play, and they're going to play other NFC teams. They probably will end up playing a game in Lambeau Field or in Chicago. And there's a lot of bad weather. Do you want a guy like Tua that doesn't have a huge arm, or do you want a guy like Jordan Love or Justin Herbert that can throw it 80 yards through the wind? It's just one of those things that, for me, I would personally rather have a little bit more physical ability and surround him with talent. Look at 2017. Perfect example. This just happened a couple years ago. Mitch Trubisky went number 2 because he was the higher floor player, quote unquote. He had less holes in his game than a guy like Patrick Mahomes, who was the natural ability. Well, where are we at 3 years later? Who in their right mind is going to say that they should have drafted Mitch Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes? Or for that matter, over Deshaun Watson, who literally is Mitch Trubisky. They're the same size, same age, same physical profile, essentially. 40 time is the same, weight is the same, height's the same, hand size is very similar. All of the measurables are very similar, but Deshaun Watson's faster. And obviously a better decision maker, but that's not really factored into what we're talking about here. So when it comes to drafting quarterbacks, sometimes you just got to take a shot. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're picking 1, 2, 3, 4, then unless you traded a bunch of stuff to get one of those top picks, it means you weren't good. Take a swing at it. If you're not good and you draft a dude and he's a bust, well, guess what? You're going to be top 3 or 4 next year and you'll get to try again. But in the meantime, you can build up young talent with your other picks. Don't draft a guy that could end up holding you back, like a Mitch Trubisky, because he supposedly has a higher floor than a guy like Mahomes who could have been a bust. Take the talent, surround him with other talent, and see where you go. It's easier to sell a miss, too, if he's just gifted. If the dude can chuck it 90 yards and he runs a 4.5, it's easier to sell. Like, look, it's an easier sell if he's not that good and to have to try again. It's not an easy thing to sell. Why do you think the Bears still have Mitch Trubisky? You can't sell that was a good pick now. You just can't. All right, so, earlier I alluded to there being some swing picks in this draft. And I think the biggest, most important one is the Detroit Lions at 3. I think the Detroit Lions have the ability to impact this draft more than any other team. And that includes the Dolphins, who are seemingly going to be on the board every 5 minutes. So it pretty much seems that the top 2 picks are guaranteed. Right? Joe Burrow's going 1. Chase Young is going 2. All right? So pick 3 is kind of where we're like, okay, this is where the draft starts. Could a team like Miami or San Diego, I'm going to do that forever. I'm going to tell you that. Los Angeles or Carolina or any of these guys or the Dolphins, do any of them make a move to come up to 3 to get Tua? Does a team, can they turn this into a bidding war where they call all of them and say, hey, look, who's going to give us the best offer to come to 3? We know you all want to be there. Or do they throw this whole thing out of whack and do they take their quarterback of the future? Do they draft Tua, let him sit behind Matthew Stafford for a year or 2, then let Matthew Stafford leave? Tua's fully healthy. Now he's ready to go take over. And then what? Now you're sitting there with 4 teams of the next 8 picks, next 5 picks really, that could theoretically use a quarterback. And what? What do they have now? It changes everything. They could hold this thing out there and say biggest winner gets it. They could flip their entire team from the Dolphins if they get this pick and come out of here with 3 or 4 additional picks this year and maybe 1 or 2 additional next year and just stack that team with young talent right now. They could do a lot of things. Detroit really has the ability to throw this draft upside down. And to be honest, I'm kind of hoping they do. I'm kind of hoping that they sit there at 3 and take Tua. Because I want to see the ripple effect after that. I want to see what that means for the Giants when they have Jeff Okudah or Isaiah Simmons to look through versus do they go with an offensive lineman. I want to see what that means for the Dolphins and the Chargers. What do the Dolphins do? Do the Dolphins take those picks right then and there, package 2 of them, and, what do they do? Do they take them and move up to number 4? Or do they sit there, play the board, draft the better of Okudah or Simmons, whoever's there, then at 18 take whatever the good lineman is there, and then at 26 a running back, a wide receiver, a corner. How does that play out? I'm really curious. Does Los Angeles, what do they do? Do they just try to trade back? And the team that comes up for one of these offensive linemen, do they go to the Jets and say, hey, look, we'll take a 2nd-round pick. We want to move back, get a few extra picks because our quarterback is gone. Do you want to come get one of these linemen? And that could change the whole dynamic of this top 10, top 15. And, it could make some really good players fall. And, a team that is sitting there at in the mid to late 20s could have a guy that should have gone at 15 sitting there at 26, 27, 28 and being like, oh crap, he's here? Now what do we do? We were looking at this guy or this dude or maybe even trading back. Well, now we have 2 or 3 guys that we really like. What do we do? So the last thing I'm going to finish with is, obviously I'm a Baltimore Ravens fan. Everybody knows that. You can see right here, I got my Ravens poster right here. I've seen a lot of mock drafts with the Ravens, but the one thing I haven't seen with these mocks is consistency. I've seen 6 or 7 different players to them. I haven't seen a receiver in the first round, or a running back, but pretty much anything else I've seen. We have 2 positions that we need to focus on this year. I've always been the proponent that the Ravens need to do nothing but ever just draft corners and receivers. I don't think we need to draft a corner this year. Tavon Young is coming back. Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters are both locked up for a couple years. That secondary is set. We have 3 legitimate, great corners. We have 2 good safeties. We are set in the secondary. We are perfectly fine. The Ravens this year need a pass rusher and a middle linebacker. Now, it just so happens that the Ravens have always been very good at finding these guys. And they've become very good at drafting in the late 20s because of their success over the last 10 to 12 years during this John Harbaugh era. My ideal first-round pick for them is Kenneth Murray. Kenneth Murray, you know how sometimes you look at a guy and you're like, well, he's meant to play for these teams. A guy like Trevon Diggs, you look at him and you're like, he should play for the Seahawks. Something like that. You see a guy, or a Patrick Queen looks like a Falcons linebacker. Smaller, faster, a cover guy. Something like that. Jeremy Chin or Kyle Duggar. They look like Seahawks. They're Cam Chancellor. You look at certain guys and you're like, that. Michael Pittman to me looks like a cowboy. He's the big, physical, strong receiver, not necessarily fast, but great hands. Kenneth Murray is the epitome of a guy that was meant to play for the Baltimore Ravens. He's big, he's fast, he can blitz, he can cover, he can tackle, he's smart, he's mature. He just doesn't do stupid stuff. He walks in, he's going to start from day one, he's going to be exactly what we had in C.J. Mosley. If he's there at 28, however we're sending in picks, whether it's text or email or if it's a Zoom or something like this where it's like a video conference with them and Goodell, that pick needs to be in immediately. If Kenneth Murray is there at 28, he's got to be the pick. He really does. Well, that's the first episode of our new and improved Take Show. Comment, like, subscribe. Let me know what y'all want to hear about. Obviously, we have the time to talk about it now. So tell me what you guys want to hear. And I'll be back next week. Thanks, y'all. Take care.